My family tried to trap me for my own good, so I ghosted all of them. I've always known my family loved me, the kind of love that's suffocating, the kind that mistakes control for care and surveillance for protection. Growing up, I thought it was normal. I thought every mother called her daughter 17 times a day, every father tracked her phone, and every sibling reported back like a little spy. I didn't realize until I was 26 that love wasn't supposed to feel like a cage. The day I figured it out, I was sitting in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by the people who raised me, listening to them explain why they had to trap me for my own good. The irony was so thick I could taste it, and in that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I would disappear, and I would never look back. My name is Hannah, and for most of my life, I believed my family was just intense. My mother, Patricia, was a former nurse who never stopped diagnosing, monitoring, and intervening. She could spot a fever from across the room and would insist on taking my temperature even when I felt fine. My father, Robert, was a retired military man who believed in structure, discipline, and knowing exactly where his children were at all times. Together, they created a household that felt less like a home and more like a fortress. Rules were everywhere, written on sticky notes on the fridge, printed out and taped to my bedroom door, repeated like mantras at every family dinner. "We do this because we love you," my mother would say. "We protect you because we care." I accepted it for a long time. I was the youngest of three, the baby who needed extra looking after. My older sister, Vanessa, was the golden child, the perfect daughter who followed every rule and never questioned anything. My older brother, Michael, had rebelled early and often, running away at 17 and joining the military, only to return 5 years later with a chip on his shoulder and a deep resentment for our parents. I was the one in the middle, the peacekeeper, the one who tried to keep everyone happy while slowly suffocating under the weight of their expectations. When I turned 18, I thought things would change. I was an adult now, I could make my own decisions. I applied to colleges out of state, dreaming of escape, of a life where I could breathe without someone monitoring my oxygen intake. But my parents had other plans. They sat me down and explained, in their calm, reasonable voices, that I would be attending the local university. They'd already enrolled me. They'd already paid the tuition. They'd already arranged for me to live at home. "It's safer this way," my father said. "You're not ready to be on your own." I didn't fight it. I never did. I went to the local university, lived at home, and graduated with a degree in something I didn't care about. I got a job at a small accounting firm, one my mother had chosen because it was stable and respectable. I dated a few men, all of whom were vetted by my parents, none of whom lasted more than a few months. My life was a series of compromises, each one chipping away at the person I wanted to become. Then I met James. He was everything my parents feared. A musician, a free spirit, a man who worked odd jobs and lived in a tiny apartment downtown. He had tattoos, a motorcycle, and the most beautiful, unapologetic laugh I'd ever heard. He didn't care about stability or respectability. He cared about art, about freedom, about living life on his own terms. When I started spending time with him, I felt like I was waking up from a long gray sleep. Colors were brighter. Music sounded richer. I felt alive for the first time in my life. I knew my parents would hate him. I knew they'd do everything in their power to tear us apart, so I kept him a secret. For 6 beautiful months, James was my private joy, my stolen happiness. I told my parents I was working late, taking night classes, volunteering. They believed me, or maybe they just pretended to. I didn't care. I was finally making my own choices. The day it all fell apart started like any other. I was getting ready for a date with James, my heart racing with excitement. My mother knocked on my bedroom door, her voice soft and sweet. "Hannah, we need to talk. Can you come downstairs?" I felt a prickle of unease, but I pushed it aside. I went downstairs, and my entire family was waiting in the living room. My parents, Vanessa, Michael, even my Aunt Margaret. Their faces were grim, serious, the kind of expressions you wear when delivering bad news. "Sit down, sweetheart," my father said, gesturing to the couch. I sat, my hands trembling in my lap. "We know about James," my mother said, her voice gentle but firm. "We know you've been seeing him. We know he's not appropriate." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "We've done some research," Vanessa chimed in, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. "He has a criminal record, a DUI from 5 years ago. He doesn't have a stable job. He's not good for you, Hannah." "He's a musician," I said, my voice shaking. "He's not a criminal. The DUI was a mistake. He's a good man." "You're not thinking clearly," Michael said, his tone condescending. "You're infatuated. We're trying to save you from yourself." I looked around the room at the faces of the people I'd trusted my entire life. They weren't angry. They weren't yelling. They were calm, rational, convinced they were doing the right thing. And that scared me more than anything. "We've made some arrangements," my mother said. "We've booked a retreat for you, a wellness center in the mountains. It's beautiful, peaceful. You'll have time to reflect, to clear your head. We've already packed your bags." I stared at her, my mind racing. "A retreat? What are you talking about?" "I don't need a retreat. I need to live my own life. You need to be protected," my father said firmly. This is for your own good. We love you too much to let you make a terrible mistake. The next thing I knew, Michael was standing behind me, his hand on my shoulder. Come on, Hannah, let's go. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I looked at the front door, the one I'd walked through 1,000 times. It felt like it was miles away. I thought about screaming, fighting, running, but I was frozen, trapped by years of conditioning, of obedience, of fear. They drove me to the cabin. It was remote, surrounded by pine trees and silence. There were no phones, no internet, no way to contact the outside world. My mother told me I'd be there for 2 weeks, maybe longer. She kissed my forehead, told me she loved me, and then they left. Just like that, I was a prisoner in a beautiful cage. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the window. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. She was pale, hollow-eyed, broken, but somewhere deep inside, a spark of defiance flickered. I'd spent my whole life being controlled, monitored, manipulated. And for what? To end up here, a captive in my own family's twisted version of love? I made a decision in that moment. I wasn't going to play their game anymore. I wasn't going to come home, apologize, and pretend everything was fine. I was going to disappear. I was going to become a ghost, someone they could never find, never control, never hurt again. I waited until nightfall. The cabin was unlocked because they thought I wouldn't leave. They didn't know me at all. I packed a small bag, took some cash from my emergency stash, and walked out the door. The forest was dark, cold, and terrifying. But I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, until I reached the main road. I hitchhiked to the nearest town, bought a bus ticket to the opposite side of the country, and started my new life. My phone buzzed constantly for the first few days. Texts from my mother, my father, Vanessa, Michael. Where are you? Come home. We're worried sick. You're being dramatic. We love you. I read every single one, and then I turned off my phone, bought a new one, and got a new number. I deleted all my social media accounts. I changed my appearance, cut and dyed my hair, started wearing different clothes. I found a small apartment in a city I'd never visited before, got a job at a coffee shop, and started rebuilding my life from scratch. It was overwhelming. It was lonely, but it was mine. Every decision, every mistake, every triumph was mine alone. I didn't realize how much I'd been suffocating until I could finally breathe. The first few months of my new life were a blur of survival. I worked double shifts at the coffee shop, my hands cracked from constant washing and my feet aching from standing all day. The pay was barely enough to cover rent, but I didn't care. I was free. I made a few friends, fellow drifters and dreamers who didn't ask too many questions. I learned to laugh again. Genuinely laugh, without the weight of my family's expectations pressing down on me. James had tried to find me. I'd left him a brief, cryptic message explaining that I had to go, that it wasn't his fault, that I'd contact him when I could. I never did. I was too ashamed, too afraid that he'd be dragged back into my family's orbit. I carried the guilt of that abandonment with me, a sharp little stone in my heart that I couldn't quite dislodge. I thought about my family constantly, not with longing, but with a cold, analytical curiosity. What were they doing? Were they searching for me? Had they reported me missing? I'd checked the news obsessively for the first few weeks, terrified of seeing my face on a missing person poster. Nothing ever appeared. I realized with a bitter laugh that they probably hadn't reported me missing. That would have been too public, too embarrassing. The wellness retreat was their cover story, and they were sticking to it. The apartment I found was tiny, barely a room with a kitchenette and a bathroom. The walls were thin, and I could hear my neighbors arguing at all hours. The landlord was a grumpy old man who smelled like cigarettes and didn't fix the leaky faucet. But it was mine. I hung fairy lights on the walls, bought a secondhand armchair, and filled a tiny bookshelf with used paperbacks. It was humble, but it was a sanctuary. I started going by a different name, Ellie. It was simple, common, easy to remember. I introduced myself that way at work, at the gym, to the few people I started to trust. It felt strange at first, like wearing a costume. But eventually, Ellie became more real to me than Hannah ever was. Hannah was the girl who'd been smothered, controlled, and locked away. Ellie was the woman who'd chosen herself. Months passed. I healed in ways I didn't expect. I stopped flinching every time my phone buzzed. I stopped scanning crowds for familiar faces. I started sleeping through the night without nightmares. I even started dating, cautiously, tentatively, a barista named Alex who had kind eyes and a gentle laugh. He didn't know my past, and I didn't volunteer it. I was content with the shallow version of myself I'd created, the surface-level Ellie who had no baggage, no trauma, no complicated history. Then everything unraveled. It was a Thursday afternoon, unremarkable and gray. I was walking home from work, my mind occupied with a conversation I'd had with Alex. The streets were crowded with the usual rush-hour chaos. And then I saw her, Vanessa, my sister, standing outside my apartment building, scanning the street with a desperate, searching expression. My heart stopped. I ducked into a doorway, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. How had she found me? How was this possible? I'd been so careful. I'd changed everything. I'd disappeared completely. And yet there she was, a ghost from my past, about to shatter my carefully constructed present. I watched her for a few minutes, my mind racing. She looked tired, thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under her eyes. She was holding a piece of paper, probably a photo or an address. She looked lost, vulnerable, almost pathetic. And for a brief, insane moment, I felt a flicker of pity. But then I remembered the cabin. I remembered the look on her face when she'd told me James wasn't good enough for me. I remembered the smug satisfaction in her voice when she'd called me infatuated and irrational. The pity evaporated, replaced by cold, hard anger. I couldn't confront her. I couldn't have a conversation. That was exactly what they wanted. A chance to guilt me, manipulate me, drag me back into their web. I turned and walked away, my legs shaking. I didn't go home. I couldn't risk her seeing me, following me, learning where I lived. I went to the coffee shop where I worked, told my boss I needed to leave early, and called Alex. "Can I stay with you tonight?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Of course," he said, concern dripping from his words. "What's wrong?" "I'll explain later. I just need somewhere safe." He didn't ask any more questions. He just gave me his address and told me to come over. I spent the night on his couch, barely sleeping, every sound making me jump. The next day, I went back to my apartment. Vanessa was gone, but a note was taped to my door. "I know you're in there, Hannah. I'll be back tomorrow. Please, just talk to me." I tore the note into tiny pieces and threw it in the trash. I packed a bag, called Alex, and told him I had to leave town for a while. I didn't give him details, just said it was a family emergency. He looked hurt, confused, but he didn't push. I hated lying to him, but I couldn't tell him the truth. The truth was too messy, too complicated, too dangerous. I moved again. This time, I went to a smaller city, one where no one knew me. I got a job at a bookstore, a quiet, peaceful place where I could lose myself in other people's stories. I found another tiny apartment, painted the walls a warm, cheerful yellow, and tried to rebuild again, but I couldn't shake the fear. Vanessa had found me once. She could find me again. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. I started looking over my shoulder constantly. Every stranger was a potential threat. Every knock on the door sent my heart racing. I was living in a state of perpetual anxiety, and it was exhausting. I missed the simple, naive version of myself who thought she'd escape. Now I knew the truth. You can't outrun your family. They're woven into your DNA, your history, your identity. The only way to truly escape is to stop running and start fighting. The flight home was the longest journey of my life. I stared out the window at the clouds, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say. I'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, in my head, in the shower, in the middle of sleepless nights. Every word, every gesture, every possible reaction. I was ready. I had to be. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She must have seen me through the window. Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. She pulled me into a tight embrace, the kind I'd craved as a child, the kind that had always felt like safety. Now it just felt like a trap. "Oh, my baby," she sobbed. "You're home. You're finally home." I let her hold me for a moment. Then I gently pulled away and walked inside. My father was standing in the hallway, his expression unreadable. Vanessa and Michael were in the living room, frozen in place. My Aunt Margaret was there too, clutching a handkerchief. It was a full audience, just like the intervention that had started all of this. "Everyone sit down," I said calmly. "We need to talk." They obeyed, like students facing a stern teacher. I sat at the head of the table, my hands folded in front of me. I took a deep breath and began. "I'm not here to reconcile," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not here to apologize. I'm here to tell you exactly what you did to me, and then I'm going to leave, and you're never going to see me again." My mother gasped. "Hannah, please, let me finish," I said firmly. I spent my entire life being controlled. Every decision I made was scrutinized, criticized, and ultimately overruled. I couldn't choose my college, my career, my friends, or my partners. You called it protection. I call it imprisonment. My father opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "You confined me," I continued, my voice rising. "You lured me to a cabin under the pretense of a wellness retreat, and you held me against my will. That's a crime. It doesn't matter that you thought you were doing it for my own good. It's still a crime. We were trying to save you from that man," Vanessa interjected, her voice defensive. "He was bad news. He was my choice," I said, meeting her eyes. "And it wasn't your place to make that choice for me." I looked around the room, at the faces of the people who'd raised me. They looked stunned, hurt, confused. They genuinely believed they were the victims here, that I was being unfair, that I was abandoning them after everything they'd done for me. "I know you love me," I said, my voice softening. "I know you thought you were protecting me, but love isn't control. It's not surveillance. It's not manipulation. It's letting the people you love make their own mistakes and being there to catch them when they fall. You never gave me that chance," My mother started crying again. We just wanted what was best for you. I know, I said. And that's why I'm not going to press charges. I'm not going to sue you or publicly shame you or make your lives miserable. I'm just going to leave. I'm going to live my own life on my own terms, and I'm going to be happy. And I need you to let me go. The silence was deafening. My father cleared his throat, his voice rough. And what about us? What about this family? We raised you. We sacrificed for you. You did, I agreed, and I'm grateful. But I don't owe you my life. I don't owe you my decisions. I don't owe you anything but the truth, and I've given you that. I stood up, my legs steady, my heart calm. I walked over to my mother and kissed her forehead. I love you, I said quietly, but I can't be around you anymore. Not like this. If you ever want to rebuild this relationship, it has to be on my terms. You have to respect my boundaries. You have to treat me like an adult. She nodded, tears still streaming. I understand, she whispered. I said goodbye to my father, my siblings, my aunt. I told them I was moving to a new city, but I didn't tell them where. I told them I'd call when I was ready, but I didn't promise when that would be. Then I walked out the door and didn't look back. It wasn't the dramatic exit I'd imagined. There were no fireworks, no screaming matches, no dramatic declarations, just a quiet, measured conversation that ended with me walking away. And somehow that felt more powerful than any shouting match could have been. I moved to Portland, a city I'd always wanted to visit. I got a job at a small publishing house, something I actually cared about. I adopted a cat, a grumpy orange tabby I named Clementine. I started writing, finally, the novel I'd been dreaming about since I was a teenager. I dated a little, made a few friends, and slowly, steadily, built a life that was entirely my own. I never went back to my hometown. I called my mother on birthdays and holidays, brief conversations that were polite but distant. She told me she was in therapy, that she was trying to understand what she'd done. I told her I was proud of her. I was. But I wasn't ready to let her back in. Maybe I never would be. And that was okay. I thought about my family sometimes, in those quiet moments between sleep and waking. I wondered if they were happier now, if they'd moved on. I hoped they had. I hoped they'd found peace, even if it wasn't with me. James found me eventually. He'd heard about my disappearance through mutual friends, and he'd been searching for me the whole time. When he showed up at my doorstep, I cried for the first time in years. He wrapped me in his arms and told me he was proud of me, that I'd been braver than anyone he'd ever known. We took things slow. He moved to Portland a few months later, and we started building a life together. It wasn't always easy, but it was honest. It was ours. On our wedding day, 2 years later, I stood in front of a small group of friends and said my vows. I didn't invite my family. It hurt, but it was the right choice. They'd had their chance, and they'd made their choices. This was my day, my life, my happiness. I looked at James, his eyes shining with love, and I realized I'd finally found what I'd been searching for my whole life. Not safety, not stability, not approval. Freedom. The freedom to choose, to fail, to grow, to love. And that was worth everything.